Welcome to We Do the Heavy Lifting. I'm your host, Dr. Jenny Yentis, and today we do grad school. What is graduate school? How do we get into it? How do you know what to do it? Do you even need grad school? All of these questions are typically asked by undergraduates, usually a little late. Maybe the semester they're graduating, maybe not. But today we have two experts with us that are in grad school right now. We have Madison Treece. She's a PhD student at Texas A&M, and Mattie Higgins. Mattie is also a grad student. She's a master's student. They are both in the Department of Kinesiology and Sport Management. And so I'm just going to ask, just to start it off, Madison, what made you choose to go to grad school?
So my undergraduate degree was in exercise science. I was at the University of South Carolina, and it's really similar to the kinesiology program here, or like exercise physiology, where it's something that in order to progress in your career, or especially for some of the bigger, more prominent jobs in that field, you kind of need to go to a graduate school, whether it's occupational therapy, physical therapy, med school, or I took a little bit different route with PhD in biomechanics and working with athletes. It's just something that in order to do more with that degree, you kind of want to go to a higher level of education to progress yourself.
Okay. So essentially you realized that there was kind of a cap for you at some point, and you just had to go in order to. Now, you did your master's as well, correct?
Yes. So I also did my master's at South Carolina. Again, very fortunate in the experience and the persons that I got to work with there. I was able to work with athletics in that setting as well, and I think that was one thing that really was great to see different job opportunities and different things that I could do going forward, because I think that's one thing that really is nice that I kind of missed out a little bit in my undergrad, or especially maybe I've started a little later, and being able to sample some of the options of what you could do going forward. I know a lot of cases you don't need to get your master's before a PhD. It just might take a little longer, or other programs do like it if you do have your master's first. So didn't quite know where I was going to go with my path, and that gave me a little extra time and was able to continue to grow and understand more of the opportunities that are out here.
Awesome. Mattie, what about you? What made you go into what is your path to grad school?
You.
Me?
It was my graduating semester, and I'd come to you. You were looking for
A little late,
I'm sorry. You were looking for research assistants in your lab, and I was like, that sounds like so much fun. And when we were there, you were like, so what are plans post-graduation? And I remember just smiling at you and really hoping that you wouldn't ask any more questions about it. And I told you that I had applied to nursing school, and I was just waiting to hear back. And I was actually in your class when I got the email that I did not get into nursing school, and I just was like, well, I don't know what to do now. So we had another meeting, and you would, I don't want to say talked me into it because I was excited for it, but you had told me all the options, and you laid everything out for me, and I was like, this just sounds super fun, and why not?
Okay.
So here I am.
Well, you make it sound a little easy. Sometimes it's not as easy as that. So typically, I think I had a path a little bit like Mattie's. I didn't really ask a lot of questions in undergrad. I assumed that when I graduate from undergrad, I could just go work at Adidas and design shoes, because that's what I wanted to do. And the problem was, back then, Adidas was still only a German company, and you had to be fluent in German. So
Minor details.
I had the minor, very minor. So I kind of fumbled around until I found my master's. But Madison, you're very right. A lot of programs, you don't necessarily need a master's to get into a PhD. They do end up being the same amount of credit hours. So it seems like it takes longer, but it should take about the same amount of time. Should being the operative word there, I think. So, Mattie, you kind of mentioned it, but you and I talked, and I laid out a lot of options for you. So what made you pick the program that you're in now, and how do you recommend to others that they think about picking a program?
I think the number one thing is don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, everyone at a university, or at least most everyone at a university, is here to help you. And they're never going to be mad or scoff at you if you send an email of like, hey, I really don't know what I want to do. Can I please come and talk to you for like 10 minutes of your day and just ask you all these questions? And I was fortunate enough to have a teacher who did that for me. So I just had all these emails all of a sudden of like, hey, I'm free this time. And I just went and talked to everyone that was even remotely affiliated with the field that I was interested in. And I had a 10, 15-minute conversation, some over Zoom, some over email, of just, hey, what is this program? What would I be expected to do? What are you doing? What are you studying? Where can I see, like, where would you see me in the field? Where would you use me? And it was just ask a lot of questions. And that's what I did. I went and talked to at least like five or six different professors. You put me in touch with some people that you knew in some of the fields that I was interested in. And it was just a lot of emails back and forth. And it was just constant, just asking questions until I found the one that I was like, I already had a relationship with you. I knew you, I knew your work. It aligned with a lot of the things that I was interested in, and it just kind of fell into place.
Madison, what about you? How did you, I guess let's go back a little further. How did you find an interest in athletics and biomechanics pretty much? I was going to say exercise physiology, but you're like me, you're a biomechanist.
Yes. So with my undergraduate experience at South Carolina, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I originally was in veterinary medicine at NC State, but I transferred because that was out of state for me. And I, freshman year, realized that is not going to be my long-term plan. And my family does business. They're very long-term, very thought out, very planned individuals. So me not having a plan definitely was something that I constantly had that little whisper in the back of my ear of, well, what are you going to do? So in my undergrad, I think I did a little bit better of a job of kind of doing things along the way, because I knew I was doing a major where there's so many different branches of opportunities from there that I wanted to like dip my toe in, just because I didn't know what I wanted. So I worked with athletic training for a couple years. I worked with strength conditioning for 2.5 years. And then during that experience, it's kind of like the more you do, the more people you meet and the more things that come about. So a team had a change in staff and they needed a manager. Well, from being a manager with that team, I got to work closely with them, became a GA during my master's. And one of my teachers, similarly to Mattie, one of my teachers taught a biomechanics class, and they opened a lab at a hospital in the area, and I worked closely with him and did really well in his class that he had me out, and I was one of the first people involved with his lab in South Carolina, so kind of got a dual experience of seeing more of that. So that kind of transitioned from the end of my undergrad where I'm like, wait, what am I doing next, to even during my master's of, okay, like I really like a lot of what I'm doing with biomechanics, and with it being at a hospital had like a varied population of like we had older people, or we had some pediatrics that had cerebral palsy, but then we had pro athletes, golfers, football, track, so a lot of different things to kind of have a taste of, well, my element would kind of be, what do I want long term? Again, I'm a planner, so I'm trying to think ahead. What are some of the things that I really liked and could see myself enjoying? Or what are some of the things that I kind of might get bored with? I need something that challenges me. I'm someone that likes to be challenged, or don't want something that just gets too stagnant or just has a check in the box or the same things every day. And there were certain experiences that I had that I'm appreciative for all of them, but some that I liked more than others. And that honestly is my recommendation. It's kind of figuring out, or just thinking really, what are the settings that you like?
Yeah, I try to tell students that as well, is don't focus so much on the actual, like what the task is that you'll be doing, but think about what is it that you need in order to be fulfilled. I'm the same way. I could never do the same thing every day. And so for me, I walk in and I have a plan for the day, and it never turns out that way, right? I think anyone in academia can agree with that. And so it's constantly different. You have students in your office, you have the class that you teach, and that's set into your schedule, but the day is always different. And so the tasks are always different. The challenges are always different. So it's one thing I appreciate. Now, Madison, you're in a unique situation where you work with athletics here at Texas A&M, and you're also a PhD student. It's a little different of a situation, but could you tell us a little bit about what the pros are and what that experience has been like for you?
I love this experience. I'm very happy to be here, and for me, it's kind of the best of both worlds. I'm a Gemini, so I have the two sides.
Okay.
But no, I have the one side that's very academic. Like I'm a nerd when it comes to the body, with exercise, with physiology, with how things work and movement comes together. But then I also have loved the experiences of working with athletes. It's a very unique group of people where genetically there's just something that makes them different than others. As much as you can say, well, train the hardest you can, I probably won't be running a 40-second lap time or some of the crazy things that these athletes can do. So that's always just something that kind of interests me to understand how there are these very unique, talented individuals. So it's something that excites me to understand that more. And with this very fortunate role, I'm able to tie together what I'm learning in the classroom with projects that I'm able to do because of research and with my PhD, and even tie that together with the testing and with the teams that I work with, that I'm able to tie together some of the knowledge that I have, some of the people that I get to connect with and use that information, which ultimately is the goal of academia, to be able to learn something, but then to be able to apply it directly to teams and to people that we're working with.
That's always nice when you can see the application of what you're doing, right? Sometimes when you're learning something, it's very abstract, and it's helpful to see that end game, that implementation of what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm a very visual learner a lot of the times. Like sometimes in a textbook, I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Or sometimes it's hard to conceptualize things, but whenever you can see how it's applied, or even then get to the point where you're creating ways of applying stuff of, well, here's how it's done. What's another way of doing this? Or how would this be more applicable for this type of group? And then not only for athletes, but for other populations too, that you kind of start to think outside of the box, and it makes you apply things in different ways, which is where I want to continue to grow and work on, but something that I'm definitely getting to.
Yeah. Madie, I have a slightly different question for you, and I hope that you can help our listeners out, especially the undergraduates that are thinking about grad school. There's different ways to pay for grad school, but you have what's called an assistantship. Can you describe what that is and what the benefits are of having an assistantship?
Yes, absolutely. So I was fortunate enough, again, Jenna was a big push for me. She fought very hard to get me an assistantship because I was a little late to the game.
That's all right.
But essentially, I work for her, and in turn, the school will pay for my tuition and fees. And my job is to essentially be a student and to be your student. So I work in the lab. This semester, you had me write a lab manual. You had me do a whole bunch of reading, a lot of reading. I got paid to do a lot of reading. But so in all of that, and then my tuition and fees were covered through the school. It comes with the one that I had insurance come along with it. And essentially, I just had to buy books, and that was a big help because I would not be here had I had to pay for this.
So when you were thinking about going to nursing school, how would you have paid for? It's a little personal
No,
the question, but
you're good.
how would you have paid for nursing school? Because are assistantships common in nursing school?
I'll be completely honest, I had never heard of an assistantship until you told me when we had that conversation of make a grad school pay for it. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. I pay them to go to the school. That's how this works. And you were like, absolutely not. That's not at all how this works. And I was like, Jenna, what is this like mind-blowing revelation? So I hadn't even sort of looked into that. Luckily, my dad was military, so sometimes I always looked if the school had any sort of veteran benefit for the dependents. But I had no idea minus pulling student loans, I had no idea how I was going to pay for it.
Okay. So that's really common. Professional schools don't typically have assistantships. So if you're thinking about physical therapy school or nursing, med school is a little different because in med school you can do an MD, PhD. So I call them doctor squared or double doctors. And if you can get into a school that has funding for that, they'll usually pay for your MD and your PhD, but you're looking at 8 years, which is a little more than just getting a PhD straight out of a bachelor's, but you end up with having a medical doctorate and then also a doctorate in philosophy and whatever topic you studied. I've got another question for both of you is, how do you know what to research or what to study? How do you know what that passion is? I remember being an undergraduate and then starting in my master's, and then even the beginning of my PhD, I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting. Ooh, that's interesting. Oh, that's so cool." And I take all these classes. Is there any advice that you have to like start to narrow that down, Madison?
It's very difficult just because I'm very similar to you, that you get so far, and especially if you're in the right field, if you're in something that you enjoy, almost anything that someone tells you, you find interesting because you're just like, oh, I like nutrition too. Oh, I like how the body works. Oh, there's this with walking. That the more you discover, it's very easy to get distracted with other things, that at a certain point you kind of have to say, well, what is more personal interests and hobbies, and what is going to be something that I take to the next level or I become the expert in, something that I'm going to devote my life to, or like as much of my time as I possibly want to. Because again, you really want to pick something that you enjoy. You're not going to pick something that it becomes a burden for you to spend so much time.
Yeah.
Or if there's something that you keep pulling towards, so okay, this is your focus, but you keep getting easily distracted towards that other thing and spending more of your free time or more of your time shifting onto that other thing, maybe you should make a change, because obviously there's a reason that you keep getting pulled towards that other direction. It might be that's really where your passion lies, that it takes a while for you to realize that, or in a lot of cases things are tied together that you can start to shift. I know I've at least heard from more people talking that at different stages of their academic career, people that they've worked with, that it's okay, well, this was more their focus and where I started out, but then I found my niche within that, or through that connection at a presentation found something else that kind of took it and run. So like at the next stage decided to make a shift to something else, which it's pretty easy to do, but I think that's still kind of difficult for me, just because it is the body, or at least in kinesiology it is the body, so everything's kind of interrelated and plays a large role in everything else, that you kind of have to decide or spend that effort to be like, all right, what am I going to invest all of my time and energy into, and not let those little distractions easily take away from you emphasizing what your focus is.
Yeah. I think with a PhD, it's really important to remember too that, I mean, you're going to know a whole lot about a topic that's like this big, right? When you're done.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to figure out what that narrowing down, and everything is still interesting. And I mean, I've been in this field for a while and I still find so many things interesting, and I can get distracted very easily. But I have to remember there's collaborators out there that have that much knowledge about their topic that's this big, and I'm interested in that little tiny topic. Work with them. And so it's hard sometimes for students because they want to be an expert in those things, but can really only focus on one or two things, become really, really good at that, and then work with those that have those other expertises. That's what I advise my students is, like you said, figure out what you really like and what you're passionate about, and what's not going to become a burden. I like how you phrased that, because it does. If you end up in a situation where you're studying a topic that you're not interested in, or you're studying a topic with a person that you don't get along with, if your mentor and you do not get along, that's a rough road. That is, sometimes people will choose a mentor based on their science and their research rather than who they are as a person and how that relationship will work out. And I think most advisors would tell you it's the person first, the science second. I don't know how you feel about that.
Which my even thought to add on to that is just to not be afraid to make a shift. If you are going down a path, and I kind of had to deal with this early on because my entire life as a kid, I was set on being a veterinarian, and the first time that I had a deep immersion in it, I was like, this isn't it for me. Like, I know when I am all into something, I'll be all in. And it's like, this isn't right. And I know that if you're having that gut feeling, if you just continue to push it aside, that will be when you're years down the road and either in a tough situation where you're like, well, I just invested this much time, that you feel guilty for leaving, but you shouldn't feel guilty for leaving. At the end of the day, you should do what makes you happy, and what makes you happy usually is the things you're willing to invest all of your energy, time, and do the right way because you enjoy it. So if there is a time when you are with someone that you don't get along with as well as a mentor, or get deeper in a topic and you're like, this is just not the setting that I enjoy, I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing in an institution, but it's pretty easy for you to talk. Like, advisors are really understanding, or especially like being able to connect with other ones to either change departments, change advisors, go to another group. That I would just advise people to not be afraid to make a change, especially if they're going down a certain point and realize, like maybe this isn't it, or I know that this isn't it.
Sometimes it's very clear that it isn't.
Yeah.
Madie, you've just recently done this. You're only in your first semester of grad school. Congratulations on surviving that first semester. Well, we got 2 weeks left. There's a little time left. If you had to think back of, your path and how you got to where you were, what are some of the things, and I know that this might be a lot to admit, what are the things that you would advise students to do that maybe you didn't have the opportunity to do? So maybe something, not a mistake, but something you wish you would have done earlier, or maybe it's something you did do that was really helpful.
I think looking back, the number one thing, I wish I would have spoken up a little bit sooner when I was really struggling with imposter syndrome. I went the first half of the semester, I was in all these classes where people were using words I didn't even know existed. And they were asking questions that I was like, I wouldn't have even thought to ask that type of question. And I remember I got in the car one day and I just sat there and I was like, I don't belong here. I'm in all these classes with people that are infinitely smarter than me. What am I doing? And we had a meeting, I think 2 days later, and you asked me how you're doing? And I was like, not good. Homegirl, I don't know what I'm doing here. Help. And I remember you just were like, that's normal. And I was like, that can't be normal.
It's normal.
No, I should feel like I belong here. And you're like, nope. If anything, you shouldn't. You should feel like you need to be pushed and challenged. And my classmates, we're not competing. They're here, they're helping me. And even if they don't realize it, those questions that I didn't even think to ask were helping me. Because the next time I go into a class, I can be like, oh, this person asked this question, maybe I should rephrase it for this class. And so I wish I would have just spoken up and had that conversation of, I just need to, not reaffirmed, but help me understand that I'm here for a reason. And I got here because I should be here and I want to be here. So speak up if you have that sensation, or if, I wish, but when I went to apply to grad school, I didn't even think that was an option for me. Because you watch all these TV shows and the people that get PhDs are just brilliant, off the charts IQ, and I'm like, that's not me. I laugh too much. That's just, no, I'm not that serious. I can't do that. But you can. And so I wish I would have known going into it that it's not a ridiculous question to be maybe I do want a master's. It's going to be hard and it's going to be challenging. Work for it. Go for it. It is not impossible. It's not this task that's so daunting. So I wish, 6 months ago, me, the baby that I was then, I wish I would have known that it's a lot of work, but it's rewarding. And you find something, we just had the conversation today about what my thesis might be on. And I got in the car beaming, and I immediately called my parents. And I was like, this is so exciting. Here's something that I'm just so passionate about, and I get the opportunity to read about it and to learn about it and research it. This is so cool. Here I am. And so anyone who's thinking about it, try for it. I know it's so cliche, but you'll never know if you don't try. So go for it.
I appreciate you bringing up the imposter syndrome, and I noticed, Madison, you were nodding as she was talking about it, and I was nodding. To any of our listeners, please know that is completely normal. Yeah. And yes, they talk about it a lot in women, but men also experience this. They may not share it as often, but if you ask them straight up, they will tell you, yes, I have felt that way too. So there's nothing wrong with you. You should feel that way at times. And then at other times, you need to have an ego. You belong in that room for a reason. You are there for a reason. Take up some space and you, especially if you were invited to the table to talk about something, clearly you are meant to be there. So it's always a good reminder. All right, we are almost out of time, but I want to get one quick thing from each of you. Any last take-home words of wisdom for the listeners?
Ask the questions. Okay. You will kick yourself if you don't. There are no dumb questions in science. I know that is a complete cliche, but if you like a topic, find someone who can talk to you about it and ask all the questions. Like, no one is ever going to be mad at you for wanting to know more about their field or about wanting to pursue something that makes you excited. So if you're even sort of thinking about it, ask it. Go for it.
Absolutely. And if you do find somebody that's an expert in that field and they're not excited to talk to you about it, they're probably not a person you'd like to choose as a mentor. My other piece of advice is if you send an email to a professor and they don't respond, and you send another one, they still don't respond, it won't change if you become their student. They still won't respond to you. So to all the professors listening, please answer your students' emails. Madison, what about you?
No, I honestly can't agree with Mattie more. And then just send the email, reach out to people, going back to the imposter syndrome. Try not to compare yourself to others. Mm-hmm. It's really hard, but the thing is, they're going to have some things that they're struggling with. And as much as you get excited about your projects or comparing to someone else's and, oh, theirs are so cool, there's so many people that will be thinking that about the work that you're doing, that you just need to kind of focus on yourself. It's hard sometimes or hard to admit it, but you kind of need to have an ego at points and be like, what I'm doing is cool and important, or here's the things that I enjoy, and don't be afraid to take a risk, apply to places that you don't think that you wouldn't necessarily get into, because sometimes you will, and the fact that you did will excite you and give you another opportunity. Or if there are sometimes, at least because I also was out of state, there are a lot of financial opportunities, especially in master's or PhD programs, like Dr. Yentes said, sometimes not in other groups, but there are a lot that if you reach out to professors beforehand, or if you're really driven, there's a lot of opportunities out there that you shouldn't let the idea of something like that hold you back from even applying. So asking a question, or even if it's before you apply, send the email. That reaching out, especially if it's someone that's interested in their topic, they love having someone to talk to about it, or someone that's reaching out saying that they're interested. They'll take that initiative and they'll do what they can to help you.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I guess I'll leave some last words of wisdom for our listeners too. Is one, there's two ways to get into grad school. One is just to fill out an application and send it in. And the other way is to, I don't want to say it's an automatic in, but Mattie will know. She spoke to me and we talked, and she filled out an application, and she listed me as what we call here at A&M a champion. It's a faculty member that will vouch, it will sponsor a student. And she did that, and when they sent me the email, they said, she's listed you. Do you want her accepted? And I said, yes. And guess what? Mattie got accepted.
Here I am.
So it's as a first-generation college student, which I am, that is one of the insider pieces of information that majority of students don't know unless they have a family member that's been a PhD or somebody else has gone through grad school, is if you are interested in something, just what Madison said, reach out, send emails, inquire, and ask about assistantships, ask about opportunities. Here at A&M, we have great programs for out-of-state students to try to give them in-state tuition if we can. There's ways to do that with scholarships. So, yeah, don't be deterred. So I thank you both very much for being on our podcast today. If there's anything we talked about, and I can't think of it, maybe some links to some information, we'll drop those in the show notes as much as we can. We'll go back through and figure out what we can add in to provide you some quick access to that information. And as always, to our listeners, thank you for listening to We Do the Heavy Lifting. And you have comments or anything, topics that you want us to talk about, please email us at huffines@tamu.edu. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's what I'm talking about. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.